You know, aesthetically, H.P. Lovecraft is extremely open to interpretation because if you read the work, he never describes the creature. He talks about how hideous and ghastly and otherworldly and nightmarish it is, and you can go anywhere with it, and it's sort of a dream for an artist. And From Beyond in particular gave the artists the latitude to go nuts with that.
What the hell is that? What? I don't know what.
No, don't move!
Lovecraft was terrified of what he couldn't see. And he felt, you know, he fell in a timeline when they had just kind of discovered all bacteria and there's a whole world that we can't see that can kill us. And so everything that he was evolving from that, you know, is right here and From Beyond.
From Beyond was one of those movies that kind of evolved after Reanimator, and it had made such a big splash. And I think Stuart, Brian, and Charlie wanted to keep as close to the first team as they could.
From Beyond, as far as I'm concerned, is truly the sequel to Reanimator. Because of the fact that From Beyond was the next one we did. From Beyond had most of the same original crew and people involved in it. Whereas everything that we had to completely do on, you know, in a day for a nickel on Reanimator, we had 2 days and a dime.
It was a huge project, so it was sort of divided up in certain elements given to certain people, and I'm very happy with the pieces that I got.
The list of effects was just astounding. There were 86, as I recall, 86 scenes with effects in it. A lot of stuff that just was much more detailed than Reanimator. So it was very ambitious for the budget.
I was credited as visual effects supervisor, but also was responsible also for mechanical effects and physical effects, and kind of also the coordinator for the 3 other makeup effects and creature effects groups that were involved in the show. It was John Nolan, John Buechler, Mark Shostrom, and that was pretty much it for the key guys.
All in all, we came up with something that probably was more imaginative because you had 3 different mindsets approaching the same elements a little differently, but then sort of coalescing in the middle and making one piece that really worked.
And whereas I worked eight and a half weeks on Reanimator, I worked 32 weeks on From Beyond. I was basically head of makeup effects for the entire film, even though there were several people that worked on it. But I was the one as far as the breakdowns and how are we going to do this, how are we going to do that, and then making sure that everything came together. I was the one that was on set through the entire process.
My role in From Beyond was creating the main renditions of the Pretorius monster. One in the kind of lumpy Mr. Bubble makeup, and the second one was the completely animatronic creature. It was a very small crew. There wasn't a lot of money. I had Robert Kurtzman was my key artistic person. David Kinlan was in charge solely of creating all the animatronics completely by himself.
We built everything in Los Angeles and we shipped it to Europe to be shot at the old De Laurentiis studio, which Charles' band had bought and became Empire Studios. And this thing was very much of a challenge. I think the shipping actually cost more than it did to build the creature.
I finished From Beyond on a Friday, had the weekend off, and started Evil Dead 2 on the Monday. So I couldn't go to Italy. I sent Bob Kurtzman and Dave Kinlan. So those 2 guys handled everything in Italy and did a fantastic job.
When you do special effects, animatronics, and prosthetics, it forces the filmmaker to think. It's not shoot a plate and put it in later. It is, how can I build the scene? What cutaways do I use? And how do I enhance the moment? And that's where the collaborative effect between special creatures and makeup and the director and the writer and the cinematographer and the actors work together to try to really create a moment that is complete and creates an experience that you don't get simply by laying over a digital element, which 9 times out of 10 looks like a bad video game anyway.
Stuart, from his stage background, wanted to try to do as much of the beyond transitions and the beyond as a practical effects. And at one time we even had discussed and tossed about trying to do things with like stage transitions, where you light one side of a scrim and then light the other side for that. But when Mac Alberg got involved in the picture, he and Stuart were able to work out lighting effects and sound effects and stuff like that that would accomplish that and still keep us on a schedule.
Stuart is a great guy to work with. He is very clear, he is very precise, and he is an artist in his own right. And he will shoot them from the specific angles that he intended for them to be shot from. That way you don't waste time, energy, and money that you don't have on angles that will never be seen. So you can put every dollar on the screen.
Stuart had a lot of color illustrations of these really crazy, wild creatures, and he was very enthusiastic about them, but they weren't something that we could think of doing on the budget we had. They were like wild comic book art just out there. And I remember trying to lock down the design for the mutated version of Pretorius, the final version, and I went through a lot of sketches, a lot of sculptures, and Stuart Gordon could really never kind of nail it. I think he'd seen too many designs, even before I met him, that maybe it just confused him. There was just so many choices, and I was getting desperate because we had to start construction. And finally, it just in a flurry of activity, one night I sculpted a little maquette, a little miniature version of the pretzel-like Pretorius creature, called Stuart up. He came over with his wife, and he walked over to it, and looked at it and said, "I'll take it." And I'm like, thank God.
I know Mark Sjostrom had a very good time with Bob Kurtzman working on different aspects of the Pretorius creature. They've created this great two-legged, long-necked entity with a penis-like gland, pineal gland that stuck out of its head.
I actually had to go to the MPAA and prove that there really was a pineal gland, that I'd actually sculpted it from what they really look like, and that the only fiction here was the fact that it grew a stalk, which is part of the script. Because they saw a phallic-looking thing coming out of the middle of a forehead, and they went X.
I think the scene and the effect I'm most proud of is the first reveal of the Pretorius creature, the animatronic version, with all that, colored video stuff going on, and the shot begins. It's a really cool shot. It's in the darkness, and you see the light come up, and you see this mutated creature with, distorted arms and legs, which clearly is not a man in the suit. And just the way it was presented was very well done.
And actually, I was allowed, in between stages of their pieces, to create transitional moments, transformations, if you will, from their creature into my version of the Pretorius creature, which is this brainy-looking insect-like entity that would then start slurping on Barbara Crampton and start to gobble her head off. Some of my crew had a lot more fun operating the creature than perhaps they should have.
Well, one of the biggest thorns in my side was the resonator. It was not wired up for shooting, and there was really nobody else on the show that could do anything with it. So that was one of the things that I was responsible for, was getting that up and running, making sure it would do what it was supposed to do. Well, one of the funny things about the resonator, or going into the Beyond, was they wanted this wind to blow. And you know, their hair blows and the lights change, goes to that purple and cyan and magenta lighting from Mac. But they also wanted, you know, like breezes to blow their hair, wind to blow their hair and stuff in this room. Well, one of the problems we had was they don't make a sound silent fan. You know, there might be an air mover these days that you could use with compressed air, but there's still going to be a certain amount of whooshing and swishing and stuff like that. So they were asking me, is there one available that's quiet? And it's like, none that I know of. You're moving you're going to have the noise of the air moving too, because they didn't want to dub all the Beyond stuff. So rather than dub it all, they actually incorporated the sound of the fan into the sound effects of the Beyond. And you know, again, that's the low budget thing. You work with what you have. There's a scene with Barbara Crampton where she's squirting the resonator with a fire extinguisher. So we were using shaving cream because when it came out, it actually expanded a little bit and looked better on camera. We must have gone through 125 cans of shaving cream and trying to find the right kind of shaving cream. That was one of the biggest problems, was trying to find a damn shaving cream in a room. Yeah, so you got, well, we got it. And then you know, of course, then every take, she squirts the resonator, I got to clean up the resonator. That was the bane of my existence on that show.
Well, we're taking out the little eel, you know, the little gelatinous looking eel. It's the first one that comes down from the lights and actually attacks him. It was intraskeletal, and on the outside it was designed to have a translucent coloring on it, which was made out of literally condoms. It was made out of overlapping condoms, the same thing they used in the original Alien. The veins and stuff in it, you know, all worked within that. But I mean, you held it up and it looked like a great big giant sex toy. And it had a whole operating mechanism and several cables in it, and it had the little RC mouth that would open and close and bite, and with sharp teeth in it. From the outside, it looks like a sex toy, but that also works as far as the way Stuart's mind works, right? So it's a living, breathing, biting sex toy, and it worked great.
It's coming.
Papa, are you all right?
No.
Lost a little piece, but I'll be fine.
And you move in the field, it can sense you.
From Beyond, we worked with some very familiar faces, Jeffrey Combs and Barbara Crampton, and we had the opportunity to work with Ted Sorrell. It was great. I guess we did most of our work with Ted doing the facial appliances and the elements for his Pretorius transformations.
Ted was just wonderful. He was so excited to be making a horror film.
When he came by my studio for the first live cast, almost the first words out of his mouth were, my uncle was Jack Pierce. And Jack Pierce, as most of our viewers know, was the makeup artist who did all the great Universal monsters, the 1931 Frankenstein, the Wolfman, the Mummy, too numerous to mention. So when Ted said, my uncle is Jack Pierce, you know, my jaw hit the floor. I'm a huge fan.
Jeffrey Combs, he was a pretty good sport for a lot of things that we had to put him through.
His pineal gland was tiny, and in order to make it work, we had a ball cap that went onto him first, and then a fiberglass track system that had Teflon cable housings in it that went next. I didn't want him to suddenly look like a Biafra baby, you know, with this big, huge, ginormous head. So working with Jeffrey, this was not a fast process. And Ken Foray used to come in on a regular basis and just pester the living daylights out of Jeffrey while he was in the makeup chair. And Jeffrey would just be like, you're gonna have your day. You're gonna have your day.
So we had to do this insect storm, the creatures from the Beyond, where they attacked Crawford and they attacked Barbara Crampton and they attacked Ken Foree. And there's a whole sequence of them fighting it off. Finally, they're cannibalistic and they eat up most of Ken Foree and he dies.
I've got Ken Foray in a folding chair tilted back on apple boxes with chains holding it into place underneath the stage. We've gone up, we've made an oval that's got an angle cut into it this way because the stage was about that thick and big enough for his shoulders and his head to fit through. we get, you know, Ken up there and get him all attached to the body and all this sort of stuff. And I hear Jeffrey Combs' voice going, "Remember all those times you picked on me in the makeup room?" He said, "Well, this is the day I get you back." And Ken's like, "Hey, well, you just go away," you know. And we're hearing Ken's voice, and because Jeffrey's up there going, "You look kind of like a football sitting on a tee." Said, "You know, I just want to rear back and just, you know." And he's just playing all this stuff, and he did it between takes through this whole sequence. So if Bubba looks pretty agitated, Bubba was pretty agitated.
At the end of the picture, Ted Sorrell's Dr. Pretorius and Jeff Combs are having a big internal and external battle, and they're all covered in slime and foam rubber and stuff like that. It's basically like KY jelly. You put it on, you go, "Oh my God, it's cold even when the room's hot."
We got to bake foam in Italy in the coldest weather they've had in literally 1,272 years.
Well, imagine this studio is like, you know, maybe 40 degrees, 45 degrees, and that stuff was like trying to put ice cubes on your body. So then we had to set up another station with big pasta pots to pre-warm this stuff. So that was an interesting challenge.
Well, I'd say probably the most difficult scene was the large lamprey eel down in all the water, down in the basement, with the electrical panel blowing up, and it's swallowing Jeffrey, and then he emerges from this without any hair and with little sucking wounds all over him and all of this sort of stuff. I'd say that probably was the most difficult, not because it was technically the most difficult, but because we shot it the day after I had 2 fingers ripped off.
John Nolan was hurt on the show, not badly, but he really racked up his finger. He pulled about 500-pound stage door through.
And I felt like pain as an explosion of color. I mean, pain almost as light. And I heard what sounded like somebody taking a bunch of pencils and snapping them all at once. And I did what you instinctively would do. I ripped my hand out. And what it did was basically it took this finger, and it was laying this way on my hand. This finger was ripped off this way. This bone was broken like a chicken bone, like a Y shape, and this finger was hanging down here. Because I had pulled it out, so I had literally snapped them out and just left them hanging by viscera.
You know, it looked like a hamburger. It was bad.
And Stuart comes around the corner to yelling. He comes around the corner yelling about who's ruining his take. Takes one look at the blood pouring out of this. My hand was up like that. My other hand was here in my pressure point in my shoulder to keep the blood down. And he took one look at this, passed out, hit his head. And so he's unconscious on the floor. Everybody else comes around the corner, thinks I've hit Stuart. And I'm like, and they're like, "Stuart, is it Stuart? Are you okay, Stuart?" And I'm like, "Hey, how about the guy with his fingers missing here? Can we get me to a hospital?" Well, they took Stuart and I to the same hospital, and it was a little clinic-y type hospital that looked like something out of a bad pre-World War II movie.
So he's in the emergency room, and they're looking his finger over, and I'm holding his hand, and I kept telling the Italian driver, "Don't look," and he looked and fainted.
And the guy that did work on me actually did a lot of bad stuff. He started snipping and throwing stuff away, and he actually lost the entire end of this finger. You know, he threw it away. The whole spongy tip was thrown away and lost. And he'd managed to wrap me up in some bandages. The next day, went in, and I was down in the water working on the lamprey eel gag. What I did not know is that I'd actually severed the nerves in my hand, and that they hadn't done anything to fix them.
So we went back for a follow-up visit, and I had to send my wife, Therese, with him, just as kind of moral support. So he goes back to the hospital, and they want to cut the tip of his finger off.
I grabbed my record, my file, shoved it in Therese's hand. We bailed out through the fire escape and climbed down the fire escape, you know, one of those things with the ladder and the whole bit, jumped in the car and drove back to the studio. And I went up to Albert Band and I waved my smelly finger in his face and I said, "Find me somebody in this country that can fix my hand." And an hour later, he had me on my way to Rome, to Salvator Mundi, the Vatican hospital. The Pope was visiting his retreat in the country, so the Pope's standby surgical team reattached my fingers, and they work.
That will be quite enough of that.
There is a very thin line between horror, outrage, sex, and humor. And From Beyond combines all of those together.
I think that basically with this film, what we had was we had the opportunity to let Stuart uncork and give him pretty much what he wanted. Whereas we were not able to do that on Reanimator.
I think From Beyond and a lot of these 80s horror, sci-fi genre films hold up today so well is really because everybody working on the films at the time, creating them, had such a passion and love for what they were doing.
I kind of look at like the films I work on are kind of like my children, you know? It's like you put so much of yourself into them that good, bad, or indifferent, they're still your baby.
And I think if you made From Beyond today and did CGI, it wouldn't have the same attitude. It doesn't have the heart. It doesn't have the passion. It doesn't have the guts.